One of the questions that came up this morning when I woke up, and I guess that is a question that many people have, is how can I live longer because life's good? How can I live longer and a happier, healthier life? And then I did what most of the people do when they have this question. I go to Google and watch a YouTube video after finding the first Google result. And one of the YouTube videos you will find is a video with a TED Talk from Robert Waldinger.
What keeps us healthy and happy as we go through life? If you were going to invest now in your future best self, where would you put your time and your energy?
Robert Waldinger is a professor, and he is actually the fourth chief of the longest study that was ever conducted. This study runs since 1938. And back then they started with a group of people and studied how they live and how they feel, how wealthy they are, how they dropped socially, how they went up the social ladder, and all that stuff. My point is, Robert was in our podcast, the On the Way to New Work podcast, and we talked to him, and this really blew my mind, because you can watch the TED Talk, that's good, but deep diving with a person like this, who knows about a study like this, who is also a Zen master himself, or like practicing Zen practitioner for a long time, which is a connection to myself, that was a great gift.
How did you become the person you are today?
Ooh, such a big question. I used to think that I became all kinds of disparate pieces and disparate selves, and now I'm beginning to understand that they weave together more than I imagined they would. So I started out in a middle-class family in Iowa. I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, in the Middle West of the United States. Never knew a psychiatrist. Certainly never knew anyone who practiced Zen. Never knew anyone who did lifespan research. So none of this was something I ever dreamed of.
I want to highly recommend to you to listen to the full podcast. It's in English. You will find it anywhere where you find podcasts. Just search for On the Way to New Work on Spotify and then Robert Waldinger. But I wanted to point out two things to give you a small heads up that struck my mind. So the interesting part is that they found out that there is they found out many things, and he shares in the podcast a deep dive, what are the important elements of a healthier, more successful, happier life and a longer life. But the number one thing is good relationships. And he will point out how. And I don't want to give too many details because it's really interesting what he shares in the podcast. And they also had one later president in this group of people, and he will share in the podcast as well which president it was. But they did this study with people from a very poor neighborhood and with guys from Harvard. So having these two groups and finding out that the relationships are the number one core thing is one of the key learnings. But what I wanted to spoiler for you guys and make it more interesting to listen to the full story, two tremendous things came out that struck me because they are connected to what we do with New Work. The number one thing is the engagement in the local community. Because in our local communities, we build up relationships. Let's say it's a choir, let's say it's a sports community, or whatever you do in your community. And this was plumbing in the 50s for the first time because of television. And then a second time, and Robert shows that, because of the smartphone. And this really reveals how important these things are to our lives and how important it is to stay the master of devices and make your mind up and not just be the user, but actually a member and participating in your life.
One of the things we asked our original subjects, we asked them to list all the people who they could call in the middle of the night if they were sick or scared. And some people listed 5, 10 people. Some people couldn't list anyone. So if you think about it, this kind of social engagement is really vital in real time, because sometimes you need somebody when you need help. And that usually doesn't come from your 1,000 Facebook friends. That comes from people who you know in the real world.
And this is so important, to stay connected to other people. Number one thing, because New Work has a second term, it's called New Work, New Culture, regarding the communities. And the second spoiler for the podcast that I just wanted to point out, because this relates back to a talk I had with Andrew Huberman, a scientist from Stanford, who said that
we are naturally supposed to move away from feelings of discomfort toward things that bring us comfort. And that, you have to be selective in what you choose for comfort, because you don't want to choose things that can be destructive. But I really see stress and loneliness and discomfort, like the not feeling good about a job or a situation, as very strong signals that something needs to change.
And Robert said something similar. Whenever he or other people feel unhappy, this is a good sign to move away from a situation, because as important as a good relationship is, it's as important to move away from a bad, unhealthy relationship. And what we tend to do, or what my experience is, we tend to numb ourselves by like consuming Netflix or doing something else, or YouTube or whatever, and we don't use this feeling of being sad, being unhappy, and let it rest for a while and feel like, why is that? Because this is actually a good thing. It helps us to redesign our life and to move away. It's not everything is happy and nice and good, and that's also not the idea of New Work. The idea of New Work is to find something that you really, really want. And there are parts that you won't like, but it's a difference to like take the consequences of something you don't like, or if you feel really, truly unhappy. So these are just two things from that podcast, and I highly recommend you now go to Spotify and like turn off the screen, lean back, and enjoy this episode with Robert Waldinger on the way to New Work, together with my partner Michael Trotman. Thanks for watching, guys. Make sure you subscribe and watch another video here.